Welcome to the studio, everyone. Today, we're going to take a look at vegetable tan leather. Vegetable tan leather is a leather tanned with naturally occurring astringents called tannins. They most commonly come from plants and tree bark. The overall vegetable tanning process can take anywhere from around 2 to 30 days, and it results in a stiff, strong, light yellow-brown colored leather, and it's most often used in things like saddlery, luggage, tooling leather, carving, sheaths, belts, anything that requires a very durable, strong leather. And Veg Tan leather is one of the oldest types, accounting for around 10% of leather produced annually. It's favored for its strength and versatility, and is available in thicknesses from around 1 ounce to 16 ounces. And that's leather, the weight, we also call that. And in general, costs around $4 to $20 per square foot. So it uses primarily tanning agents that come from nature, and these are, from a variety of different, plants and trees. And what happens is these astringents, called tannins, essentially bind to the collagen fibers in the hide, covering them up. And this helps make them less susceptible to, bacterial growth. It becomes a little less water soluble and a little more flexible and pliable. And the unique vegetable tanning process, often referred to as well as Veg Tan, depending on the process used, can take, around 2 days in a very accelerated process, or it could be up to 30 days more in a typical process. And this is carried out most often in very large pits. Also, it can be done in very large rotating drums. And this helps agitate the leather within the tannins, helping them to mix and bind in a more consistent, even way. They're usually, during this process, exposed to stronger and stronger tannins. So sitting in that pit or, turning in those drums, that can actually be done several times within one tanning process, which is why it could take up to 30 days and potentially even longer, depending on, what else is done during that process. Some of the most common barks used for Veg Tan include the chestnut, the hemlock, the mangrove, the oak, the redule, the wattle, and the mimosa. And surprisingly, each of those different types will yield a different type of finished leather. The look and feel may not be drastically different, but there will be some, differences, and that could range in terms of its pliability, its softness, even how it may receive dyes later. So it's really important to choose the right tannin, and in most common Veg Tan production processes today, it's optimized for the different end uses of those leather materials, including dyeing, tooling, things like that. So let's look at a little bit of the history of Veg Tan leather. It's been used for tanning for thousands of years, often for a lot of key leather goods that have been used to advance groups of people and different cultures, for years and years over time through their history. So it's believed that the vegetable tanning process was developed by the Greeks around 800 BC. It possibly could have begun in Egypt. Rome would later adopt similar practices, and they found that by using organic material that is high in tannins could help preserve the hide in ways that would withstand the elements and lead to a slower degradation process over time. So veg tanning was the main process until around 1858. In that year, chromium tanning was invented and enabled leather to be produced much faster, much thinner, and softer. All of those were really preferred qualities at the time, and still be to this day. Let's take a really close look now at vegetable tan leather, so you can see what those fibers look like at a very detailed level. So here we've got the top, and you can see a relatively smooth looking surface. And there's marks where the hair used to grow out of the hide, and you can see a pretty tough, durable texture to that top surface. Relatively tight grain pattern, and mostly even color, across, especially, if you back up from the zoomed view, it'll look relatively consistent. Looking at the bottom, we see a little bit more of an open, grain pattern, as is to be expected. The further down the hide we go, typically that grain pattern is going to open up a little more, have some more space between the fibers, and even the fibers themselves become a little larger. So even with that, this is a relatively compacted, bottom view, and that's what the Veg Tan leather looks like up close on the bottom. All right, this is a great view. I love the section view because we could see the actual layers now of that leather as we go from the top all the way to the bottom. So on the top, we see a really nice, full grain leather there. It's a very dense, much stronger surface, and that's where a lot of the value of that strength in the hide comes, is from that top section. As we move down further into the hide, we see the grain pattern begin to open up, and that's where the fibers get a little larger, a little more space in between them. And that's often where things like a suede or a split leather are cut from, where we take that middle section, separate it from that top section. And then we've got that softer middle that again is good for things like suede, nubuck, whereas the top is a very nice, durable, closed fiber material. And then as we go further down on the bottom, we see the fibers get even larger. And similar to what we saw in the previous image of the bottom section, we could see them having a little more space in between, and things like that. And so it's a really cool look into, the actual layers of a vegetable tan piece of leather. And if you're using this for something like, tooling or stamping, that's going to happen in that top layer where the fibers are very dense and can receive those patterns and carvings well, and basically hold that design over time. For the production process, we went into that a little bit earlier in terms of vegetable tanning and the timing and the tannins and things like that. So here we'll go over just the basic steps in that tanning process. They're usually around 28 to 35, but we'll keep it very high level here into about 4. And for those, we have the curing section is number 1. And typically that's preserving the hides so that they can then be tanned. And they can begin to degrade pretty quickly. So when we cure them, it kind of stops that degradation process and then allows them to be tanned, for days or weeks or months, and still keep in good shape. So the next overall step would be the actual tanning process, where the veg tan leather is soaked in the tannins for periods of time. And those tannin mixtures can vary based on, desirable of the output or the tanning process that's used by a certain tannery. And essentially that'll happen over days or weeks, possibly months, and get the leather, fully tanned. The next step, broadly speaking, is basically the drying process. We'll let those now tanned hides dry out, and then we'll color them as well. And that could be either one, they could not be colored at all, such as like a natural veg tan leather, or they could be bleached or dyed or colored in other different ways, to give them some sort of a more permanent pigment. And then the last overall process in that tanning is going to be the finishing. And this could be where either a surface finish is applied, if that's desired for that type of leather, or it could even be some type of conditioning, is infused into that, such as oils or waxes or things like that, to help kind of give more unique characteristics to that finished leather. So again, vegetable tan leathers are available in a variety of looks and feels and finishes, and part of what makes them a preferred type of leather for certain applications is that there isn't a lot of dyeing, or conditioning or oils or anything added to them. So while in some you can certainly get that, in general, the veg tan leather is preferred for its most natural state, created by primarily natural tannins and processing steps. Looking at volume, we see around 180 million square feet of vegetable tan leather produced each year. Some of those key countries for production include Italy, India, Brazil, and Japan. Some of the biggest exporting countries include Italy, India, and Brazil. And some of the largest importing countries for veg tan leather include India, the United States, and China. And certainly, these can vary year by year as production shifts, but broadly speaking, these are some of the larger countries that work with this material. For cost, we're looking at around anywhere between $4 and $20 per square foot, and there's a lot of variability in there. You could certainly find it cheaper and more expensive, and the biggest factors include, the quality of the hide, what type of hide it is, the production process used by that tannery, what types of tannins were used in that production process, if there was anything infused into that material, such as oils or waxes, if there's any finish applied, if there's any surface texture stamped or imprinted into it. So there's a lot of variability, between the actual type of veg tan leather, and that's what gives us that relatively large range. Looking at the pros, Veg Tan Leather is a very strong and durable leather. It can be used for a lot of applications where you're using that leather good day to day. With proper care and maintenance, can literally last years, decades, sometimes even centuries if cared for well. So it's a really durable leather. Another great pro is that it develops a patina over time, and that is kind of that gradient look to the color as it absorbs, kind of oils and dirts from day-to-day wear and tear, starts to change that color a little bit on the surface as those fibers absorb those things. And over time, that can actually look really good. And so some vegetable tan leather pieces actually look better after years or decades of use, than when they're brand new, even though they look great when they're brand new as well. And another pro is that it receives tooling and stamping. Other leathers like chrome tan leathers are much softer, whereas this vegetable tan leather has that durable surface and can receive stamps and carvings and basically art and impressions into that surface, and it will retain that because that stamping alters the fiber structure a little bit by pressing them in, and the vegetable tan leather will receive and keep those kind of impressed surface areas, making it a really unique and really cool material for that type of leather work. And you've probably seen that a lot in Western style belts with floral carvings or weaving carvings and things like that, and stampings. And that's why this leather is excellent for things like that. Looking at some cons, it is definitely a stiff leather. So it's not really flexible. You're probably not going to use vegetable tan leather for, like a jacket, or some type of very flexible, soft clothing. So it is relatively stiff. Along with that, it can be relatively heavy. Since it is a stiffer leather, it's dense as well, and there's definitely some heft and weight to that. And also, it is an unsealed leather, meaning on the top there isn't any kind of a water-resistant or stain-resistant coating naturally or added on, and so it's going to be a little more receptive to taking in stains and things like that. While that's great when it results in a patina over time, it could also be a con, because it's may get stained more easily with things that aren't wanted on that, just because that top grain is an open pattern. Some great uses for Veg Tan leather include so many leather goods. For example, we've got day-to-day accessories like wallets, belts. You could use it for boots and shoes. We see it often in watch straps, keychains, small covers, like journal covers, passport covers, book covers, portfolios. We also see it for things like more functional, like chaps, tack for horses and other animals, pet collars, and even for art, like leather art, carving, tooling, and then all the way up to things like handbags and briefcases. It's really a versatile material, and you've probably seen it in a lot of places. And if you're wanting to make something, Veg Tan leather, outside of clothing, soft clothing, you could probably use Veg Tan leather for pretty much any project. And a few tips for working with Veg Tan leather. Always use a sharp blade. Given that this is a relatively thicker material, it's going to be a lot more beneficial to have a sharp blade to cut through it so it doesn't catch and pull on any of those fibers as you're working with it. Plus, you're going to have those edges a little more exposed, and so you're going to want them to be nice and clean and straight, resulting in a really good finished piece. If you're going to be looking to shape the leather, you could definitely wet mold it using a variety of techniques. And so when doing that, just make sure you get your water composition right, so it isn't too flexible or it isn't too rigid, and that way it receives whatever you're doing to it in an effective way. And if you plan on skiving, look at the back side of the leather. If it has an overly rough texture, like really rough, it may be an indicator that the tanning process may not fit what you're trying to do with it. If you're looking for a very smooth, even cut through as you're skiving. So that's just one little trick you can learn to help result in better skiving results that'll obviously show through in your finished piece, even if not visibly, in the finished thickness and how that wears over time. So there you have it, a look into vegetable tan leather, probably one of the most popular or iconic leathers when we think of leather working. It's great, it can develop a patina over time, can be relatively timeless, And so if you're going to invest in creating a piece that you really care about, that you want to perform well and kind of look potentially better the more you use it, consider vegetable tan leather. It can make something that is really, really great. If you have questions, let us know. We're happy to share more. And until next time, keep crafting.